On Monday, Republican Congressman Tim Huelskamp of Kansas said of the sequester cuts, quote, "This will be the first significant Tea Party victory and that we got what we set out to do in changing Washington." I think what's fascinating about this is the trajectory of the way the sequester is being spun. In the beginning, Republicans said the sequester is a bad thing and it's Obama's fault, hence the failed Obamaquester hashtag. But by the end of it, they were just like, it's actually a good thing. Like, this is what we wanted. You saw a lot of honesty, I feel like, from the members of the Tea Party caucus. There's a whole bunch of quotes this week basically being like, look, this is what we wanted. Paul Ryan, of course, said this back in 2011. This is what the Tea Party... Do you, Mattie, view this as a success for fellow travelers in the austerity camp?
No, absolutely. I think you're right in terms of Republicans winning this debate. Now, the first part I would point out is that if we're talking about there needs to be a balanced approach, there needs to be revenues and spending cuts, that's what the fiscal cliff was. We all kind of forget that the sequester started in January 1. That was part of this whole fiscal cliff debate.
It started the Budget Control Act last year.
Correct, but those were supposed to hit at the same time. We're supposed to have the biggest tax hike in history coupled with sequester cuts. Now, sequester Act came months, but if you're looking for revenues as part of the deal, you already had it.
Yeah, although the New York Times today runs a good article sort of tallying all this up, and what you end up with is we're now on set with the sequester in place, right? We're on track to get the vaunted $4 trillion of deficit reduction that everyone wanted, a small amount of elite people who talk to each other wanted, which was a $4 trillion over 10 years. That was kind of the target. With the sequester, we have it, and they point out the ratio of spending cuts to revenue is 4-to-1, right? Simpson-Bowles was 2-to-1. So this, I mean, if you're just looking at in pure terms of the ratio, it's the spending cut side that's winning.
Mattie sort of did a thing that I hear a lot of Republicans do, which is you start counting with the tax increases, which occurred as part of the fiscal curb deal in January. But I don't see why you wouldn't start counting with the spending cuts, which of course started with the Budget Control Act. At that point, $1.5 trillion, and then if you add on the other trillions in ongoing cuts, you get to this kind of ratio. Look, regarding your introduction, I just wanted to say one thing. There's another person who's been talking, I think, sanely about this in terms of the jobs deficit, which I believe is the most immediate deficit we face right now, and that's Ben Bernanke.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there are, it is I think a very bad outcome, one that Republicans and Democrats have contributed to, that we're stuck in hair-on-fire deficit obsession, which I believe is a medium or a long-term constraint, not an immediate one.
And I think it's important that you said that about Democrats, right? I mean, here's the thing. Bill Clinton, and I'm not blaming him in any way for this, but he was the guy who touted surpluses, right? Surpluses, talking about surpluses, deficits, as opposed to jobs in the economy, is essentially the box that our politics are now in. I mean, it's interesting to think about. Dick Cheney was the guy who said deficits don't matter, right? And the old idea was that
but to that point, deficits don't matter. You know, if you're a conservative, you're looking at the size of government. You don't necessarily know how much the government is not taking in taxes. You care about how much they're overspending.
See, thank you for saying that. Thank you for being honest, because it's true. Conservatives don't care about the deficit.
Well, deficit's like a lexicon. You know, it's kind of the rhetorical device. It's not actually the product that we're focusing on.
Yes, that is 1,000% true.
I know they thought that. I didn't think they said that.
No, that's right. Exactly right.
I don't see why it's a problem to be able to say that. Size of government is the problem.
Right, that's what you care about.
And you talk about Republicans.
But don't you use the deficit as a cudgel to reduce the size of government?
Yes.
Is that the idea?
But it's not a cudgel. It's the way you talk about things, right? The size of government can mean many, many things.
Yes.
Deficit, you know, that relates to people. It's a narrative that people understand.
I don't think the deficit does relate to people, A. But B, I totally agree with you. I mean, the only way to make sense of the Republican position is to ignore that when they say they care about the deficit, because they don't care about the deficit, right? I mean, the people who are ideologically committed to reducing the size of government...
They don't care about the size of government either. That's the thing. I mean, it's not like George Bush was not, you know, someone who cared a lot about the size of government.
Right.
That's correct. But I mean, is he the token Republican?
Right. No,
well, he's not a token. He led the party for 8 years. You don't get to call him a token.
The Progressive Caucus is actually, in a certain sense, making the Reagan old Dick Cheney argument. Not explicitly, but by basically saying we should be focused on jobs. We should be focused on growing the economy. The old Reagan argument was grow the economy.
You don't have to. And Stephanie, you are an academic who does academic work concluding that what Dick Cheney said is right?
Well,
which is that deficits don't matter.
Well, it's not that necessarily. I wouldn't say that deficits don't matter. I would say deficits don't matter the way most people think they matter. And what the Republicans Republicans do, and the Democrats give them a bit of help along the way, is to focus everybody's attention on the deficit and then use that for cover to do the things that they really want to do, which is, you know, go after the progressive agenda and begin to dismantle and undermine the Great Society and the New Deal and pull apart all these things that really drive them crazy.
But here's the thing about that, right? And this gets to what I think is so fascinating about the sequester. So my pet theory, is that the Republican Party, I'm not quite convinced. I used to be convinced they really wanted to go after Social Security and Medicare. But based on their behavior in the last year, I'm increasingly convinced they don't want to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare. They certainly don't want to make cuts to current beneficiaries. And the reason is that's their base. Okay? Like, demographically, that's their base, A. B, poll Republicans about cuts to Medicare and Social Security.
Tea Party.
Tea Party. People self-identify Tea Party. Wildly unpopular. And if they really wanted cuts to Social Security and Medicare, if that's what they were focused on, they could have had them by now, because it has been extended time and time and time again. I want to show the president sort of complaining about the fact that he has tried to give them this, and they won't take yes for an answer. This is the president on Friday talking about putting forward his proposed deficit reduction deal.
I've put forward a plan that calls for serious spending cuts, serious entitlement reforms, goes right at the problem that is at the heart of our long-term deficit problem. I've offered negotiations around that kind of balanced approach.
And he's gotten nowhere. And Ezra Klein has this great bit of reporting this week about an off-the-record briefing of the Republican legislator saying, well, if the president would just offer something like change CPI, which is a different calculation of Social Security, that it's in real terms a cut to Social Security. He says, if you just offer that, he could get somewhere. And someone raises their hand and says, that's in the one-page thing they proposed. Wait, hold that thought. I want to take a break and come back and talk about who really does want to cut entitlements after this.
As we